Tonight in Fairmont Crest, the truth finally detonates. In this video, we break down the bombshell confession that Katie is Carlton's daughter and the shockwaves ripping through every alliance, every fortune, and every fragile sense of honor. We'll unpack Nicole's long-buried secret and the price she's about to pay, Carlton's push for a DNA verdict he hopes will fix what time already broke, and Katie's fight to keep her identity from becoming a trophy in a public war. We're also tracking the power plays, Ted's revenge campaign, Leslie and Eva's media maneuvers, Joey's help with strings attached, and Donald's lone stand to protect Katie's autonomy. If you love high-stakes character drama and ruthless strategy, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, then buckle up. The gates are open, the secrets are louder than ever, and someone is about to learn that winning the narrative isn't the same as doing right by a girl who deserves to choose herself. Nicole's confession wasn't just a knife driven into Carlton's long-slumbering memories, it was the starting gun for a chain reaction that cast a shadow over all of Fairmont Crest. In the instant she forced herself to admit that Kat is his daughter, the fragile order between honor, power, and family split wide open. Those words were no longer scattered syllables from a mother trapped between regret and the instinct to protect, they became a ruthless variable, forcing everyone to face what they had hidden or lied to themselves about for years. Carlton watched his life like a ledger someone had flipped upside down, the past of a love left behind, the present of a man who believed he could control every factor, a future suddenly exposed as a cold vacancy he didn't know whether to fill with mercy or punishment. He wanted a clean truth, sealed by procedure, verified by science. Demanding a DNA test was not only technical, it was Carlton clinging to the self-image he'd always pursued. The man who trusts only what can be proven, measured, signed, and stamped. But the more he gripped the process, the more he felt himself standing at the brink, where the memory of a very distant afternoon collapsed in and squeezed the breath out of what he called reason. Nicole saw the storm forming on Carlton's face, where every line pulled taut between wounded pride and disappointment. She had little pity for herself. Her courage wasn't the dazzling kind, it was the exhaustion of a person who'd run too long, the surrender to a truth that could not be carried even one more day. But truth does not forgive on its own. It has a price, and that price is usually paid in things that can't be recovered: trust, reputation, the relationships she had used to shield Kat. In that orbit, Ted became the first piece to spring loose. He realized he'd been turned into window dressing through years that felt warm but were in fact cold, and the humiliation lit the fuse on a rage that had always waited for a name. He didn't need to shout to be heard, he needed the right place, the right time, the right medium. Ted knew how this world works: honor belongs to whoever holds the narrative and controls the cadence of release. He began attacking Nicole not with cheap rumors but with fragments that looked plausible, adorned with the polite smile of a man hurt yet dignified. Kat stood at the eye of the vortex, the still point surrounded by winds. She didn't need anyone to explain the meaning of DNA, didn't need an adult to define father or lie. She felt only the void of a childhood suddenly filled by a face she had once imagined but never allowed herself to hope for. Her fury wasn't the tantrum of a stubborn child, it was the anger of someone smart enough to see how adults use the word protect like a curtain to hide their cowardice and power. She wanted a father, but she refused to become a trophy proving who was right or wrong. Every look turned toward her: pity, curiosity, calculation. Was an invisible hand tugging her into a new order where surnames, money, and social position would decide what people called her. She felt exposed, as if the entire town had transformed into a tight room lined with mirrors, leaving no exit. Leslie and Eva accepted the news as if it were a gift from fate, a chance to reset the entire board. Every dignified war needs accelerant, and Nicole's confession was the perfect solvent to dissolve masks. Leslie didn't need to be crude, she simply twitched the old strings of her network, arranged accidental encounters, sent a few looks precise enough to make people understand. Eva took the role of unofficial narrator, calmly stitching loose scraps into a panoramic picture audiences craved because it entertained, came with moral smugness for self-comfort, and offered a villain on whom to dump their own life's failures. Jan and Mona took charge of the storm's sound system, the town's loudspeakers. They didn't need to invent, they needed only to choose the right camera angle, magnify a breath, a glance, then drop it into a crowd starving for news like bait into a lake long unfed. Every leaked word had a target: push Nicole onto the back foot and turn Kat into the epicenter of a meticulously produced social quake. Naomi and Jacob, meanwhile, saw the story as a mirror forcing them to examine their own secrets. Amid a pregnancy crisis, they had to revisit a question they thought settled: what is transparency when the truth can destroy what they call a family? They realized avoidance isn't harmless, it merely postpones the explosion to a moment of greatest weakness, when every shard cuts deeper. The lesson from Nicole didn't make them less afraid, but it did force them to understand that every choice carries a price. They looked at Kat and saw an alarm bell. A child doesn't need a perfect story, she needs respect. If a lie can stretch on for years, where is the final border between a family and a coalition of interests? Danny and Haley moved with the reflexes of those used to breathing air where reputation circulates faster than any bank transfer. They knew how to turn other people's affairs into a thermometer for the social arena. A party, a fundraiser, an impassioned speech, a timely charity, any of it could redirect public current if Kat were placed at the moral center, victim to protect, or piece to be put in its proper place? Danny understood the crowd's cruelty. Today it pities, tomorrow it demands justice, by the weekend it's bored because a new story has arrived. Haley knew better than anyone, in Fairmont Crest, no one wins forever. Everyone is buying time, purchasing goodwill, accumulating bonds so that when the next wave hits, there's something to hold. Joey slid in at the perfect moment, catching the metallic scent of opportunity. He proposed a package that looked legal and neat for Carlton: a damage control communications plan, legal coaching on temporary custody, quiet bargaining with Nicole over future terms, and a few friends in the pipeline to ensure the chain of custody for the DNA samples wasn't misunderstood. Each piece of advice poured like good wine, smooth enough to make the listener feel sober. Beneath the glossy surface, though, were the levers Joey wanted to stockpile. He didn't need to declare what he was, he needed only to appear at the right time, so he could appear again later as indispensable. The problem is, the more hands reach in, the more truth becomes a commodity to be haggled over. Can a DNA test be considered beyond dispute in a town where every gaze has a price and every signature gains weight in the right context? Donnell stood as a purposeful crosscurrent to the gale. He refused to let Kat's life become evidence for any faction. He didn't want to see Carlton claim fatherhood by winning a PR war. He didn't want Nicole to use motherhood as a final shield and then forget the invisible damage she'd caused. Donnell tried to plant one simple principle in that gap: a young girl is not the yardstick of adult honor. But he knew quiet reminders usually lose to noise and lights. So he chose an uncommon vantage point, putting Kat's autonomy above every calculus of advantage. Life had taught him that kindness is never glamorous, and those who practice it are often mistaken for naive. He accepted the label, because in a place like this, someone has to stay on the far bank when the crowd cheers from this one. In the sealed rooms of attorneys and advisors, strategies were drawn with permanent marker: court orders to protect biological samples, mandated chain of custody, a narrow list of authorized labs, strict partitioning of data access, and penalties for leaks. Words that sounded objective became weapons. Everyone wanted to be first to see the probability on the results page, because holding that moment meant holding the story. Ted lobbied a circle of principled journalists to suggest that true transparency requires public access. Leslie tugged old strings to guarantee the right witnesses at every hearing. Eva pre-arranged an off-the-record interview with a bioethics expert eager to say things both correct and palatable. Jan and Mona, needing no proof at all, waited only to read the expression on the faces of those leaving court, then would paste on moral labels they believed fair. Against this backdrop, Nicole had to choose between staying silent to avoid making it worse and stepping forward to take all the blame so she could at least keep the right to tell her own story. She knew she had committed the worst sin in the realm of relationships, taking away the right to know from a person who had the right to know. She could speak of fear, of long nights, of threatening glances, of calculations where each misstep was a cliff, but she knew those were paving stones for her own cowardice. She wanted to apologize, but apologizing meant putting Kat in the crosshairs again. She wanted to fight, but fighting would make her the monster her enemies were waiting to see. Every option led to a narrow room where the light only illuminated the crumpled face of shame. Carlton, by contrast, imagined that he needed only to be steadfast. But his steadfastness stood on sinking ground. He believed in DNA because it doesn't lie, yet DNA doesn't know how to parent a girl raised on doubt. Results might grant him rights, but what would those rights become if Kat refused to see him as a father? He defined honor by rational decision-making, but can reason heal the cut of lost time? He realized his anger wasn't aimed solely at Nicole, it was aimed at his past self, the man who built impressive things and missed the echo from a distant moment. He couldn't forgive Nicole immediately, yet he didn't want to become the hammer driving nails into Katie's heart. From that thin line he understood the worst sin here was hesitation. In Fairmont Crest, the hesitant are devoured by someone else's narrative. The chain of custody became a battlefield. A veteran technician suddenly took leave. A sealed container arrived 17 minutes late. An internal email was misforwarded with the protocol attached. These small accidents were enough to ignite the suspicion that the results would be doubted no matter what they said. Joey watched quietly and memorized the names of each link. Accidents don't need staging, they need rearranging, right place, right time. He also knew that if Carlton moved too fast, he would weaken his leverage for long negotiations. If too slow, he'd be swallowed whole. So Joey balanced everything with the predator's patience, seeming helpful while counting beats for the final pull of the string. On the night before the last sample was processed, Katie slipped past every adult's improvised surveillance net. She walked the streets where her shadow stretched like a rope tied to her wrist. She tried to imagine the future as a blank frame she could repaint, but whispers clung like dust she couldn't brush off. She thought about her name, her surname, about memories read aloud in idle evenings for other people's entertainment. She wondered if privacy ever truly belonged to her in a town that treats every secret like communal property. She wanted to disappear, but disappearing means letting others finish the story. She wanted to stand up, but standing means accepting a game whose rules were written by those with more to lose than she has. Each option was equally nauseating. The next morning, the court issued a temporary order protecting Katie from the media, and sealed the DNA results until an emergency hearing on interim custody could be held. Outwardly, it was a win for calm and the law. Inside, every faction knew they had each lost a little. Ted was disappointed he couldn't pull the public into the crescendo he'd planned. Leslie disliked how the seal delayed a carefully curated rollout. Eva still smiled, knowing every embargo inflames curiosity and increases the price of leaks. Jan and Mona stepped back to collect more witness observations, waiting for the first hairline crack to roll into a snowball. Joey adjusted his plan, adding a new countdown and a fresh face to play independent verifier. Donnell exhaled once, knowing this was only the pause before the next incline. Of all the diagrams redrawn that day, only one was visible to no one but Katie, the map of her emotions at the intersection of a collapsing mother and a man who wanted to believe he could still repair things. She tried to picture the day the envelope opened like a door. If it confirmed Carlton as her father, what room would it open to? Would it be the lacquered wooden chamber of a clan where everything sits exactly in place, but her place is set by numbers? If it denied him, would she gain freedom or acquire another label, the girl who belongs to no one? The question clung to her like a metallic taste at the back of her tongue. There were no comfortable answers. As she learned to breathe through each wave, the adults tightened their threads. Nicole spent a day writing down everything she was willing to accept. She listed terms she could sign, apologies she could make, therapy she could attend, documents she could deliver. The list lengthened like the inventory of a company on the brink of bankruptcy. The most terrifying line was the last, what she could not give, Katie's lost time. No money, no ceremony, no court order could return it. Realizing this, a cold stiffness slid through her chest. Genuine remorse sometimes has no form in which to be recognized. She wasn't seeking instant forgiveness, she was seeking the chance to do right for the first time after a long sequence of wrongs. She considered petitioning the court herself to establish a best interest guardian council for Katie, names aligned with neither her faction nor Carlton's. It was her way of accepting long oversight for a long road ahead. Meanwhile, Carlton cancelled every non-essential meeting and sat alone with nameless files. He forced himself into a stillness he had avoided for years. In that space he was not an executive, not a patriarch, not a representative of anything but a man who may or may not be a father. He fingered his thoughts bead by bead. If he is her father, what will he do on day one to avoid the old pattern of men who used power to paste over tenderness? If he is not, how will he step back without letting Kat fall off a safe shoulder? He knew each decision now would seed either a future grievance or a future healing. At the edge of thought, a quiet, haunting question, When did he hand over the right to define himself to a number printed on paper? When dusk squeezed the sky into a thin strip of fading light, every faction's script stood ready like troops before battle. No one conceded early, everyone kept a silk-wrapped knife within reach. Fairmont Crest fell silent as if honoring an ancient rite, the waiting for a truth everyone claimed was necessary, though each secretly feared the consequences would outrun their grasp. Ted's indignation waited to be set upon the scales of justice, Leslie's composure poised for a sharp turn in public sentiment, Eva's smile tested in the mirror to ensure every angle flattered, Jan and Mona rehearsed headlines, Joey trimmed milliseconds off his timing, and Donnell stitched the slow, durable seam of persistence. At the center, Nicole and Carlton stood on either side of a door. Kat alone held the key, and she no longer knew where she had dropped it. The day of the envelope's opening approached like audible footsteps on a wooden floor. Whispered phone calls grew shorter, handshakes firmer, greetings calmer than usual. Quiet is the most dangerous sound, it foretells an explosion loud enough to wake what people have worked so hard to lull. Will DNA liberate or imprison? Will custody become a guardrail or a gleaming cuff? Does adult honor mean anything if it tramples the feelings of a girl learning to name herself? Can a late confession begin true atonement, or is it merely a fresh coat of paint over the same old structure of power? Who touched the chain of custody, who dropped those 17 minutes into the accidental sky? And if everything shatters in an unforeseen direction, is there any path left on which one chooses decency over victory? Fairmont Crest offered no answer. The town merely stood, studying itself in the scandal as if in a giant mirror no one bothered to wipe. Every face a water streak, every sigh a crack, every decision a knife tugging the glass tight. Before the seal is broken, before any number is read aloud, perhaps the most frightening thing isn't the truth itself, but the ways everyone is prepared to use it to prove themselves right, forgetting the only thing worth protecting. A young girl deserving to grow without being conscripted as evidence in any war. But in a place like this, can such a wish ever reach its destination when every road crosses a square where people applaud beautiful collapses more than quiet endurance? And if, in the end, Katie must choose, will she choose anyone at all or choose herself, leaving the remaining adults to learn the lesson they should have learned long ago? No one has the right to turn a human being into a tool for safeguarding their own honor? Before we wrap, remember this isn't just a paternity twist, it's a referendum on power, accountability, and what it actually means to be a parent when the truth shows up late. As the court seals the DNA results and the interim custody clock ticks, every move matters. Ted is priming a PR ambush, Leslie and Eva are choreographing the optics, Joey is stockpiling leverage disguised as help, and Jan and Mona are oiling the rumor machine for a picture-perfect leak. Nicole is writing the ledger of her atonement in real time, Carlton is learning that a number on paper can't teach you how to show up, and Katie, at the center of it all, is deciding whether she'll be evidence or a person with the final say over her own name.